Will you be ours? The twins asked, while the town said a woman like her was never meant to be loved. A man doesn't look elsewhere unless his wife failed him. Lena's mother said it without looking up. Spoon moving, steady. Like it was simply the weather, something true and unchangeable that had nothing to do with her. Lena's hands were flat on the table. The envelope sat between them. Mama, please. Just let me stay. I can work with Papa, help at the shop. I won't go near the church. I won't go anywhere He remarried her. Her father's voice was quiet. 3 weeks after the divorce. Moved her straight into your house. The whole county is talking. He chose to leave. I didn't. Your size. Her mother's spoon kept moving. Your empty womb. That is what the neighbors say every time I walk past their gates. That is what the church whispers. She set the spoon down. We married you off young so you'd stop being our burden. And look at you. Right back where you started. I have nowhere to go. Her father slid the envelope closer. His voice went gentle, which was worse than if it had been cruel. Go to Ironwood Creek. Far enough that people won't connect you to us. Find work, a kitchen or anything. We love you, Lena, but we cannot carry this shame. Lena looked at her mother's bowed head, at her father's hands, patient, waiting. She picked up the envelope, walked upstairs, came back down with her bag. Her mother didn't turn around. The door closed quietly behind her. Not a slam. Just silence, like she had never mattered enough to fight over. Ironwood Creek received her the way it received everything that didn't belong, with stillness and sideways looks. She walked straight to the boarding house. The woman behind the desk looked her up and down slowly. Full up. Behind her, a row of empty key hooks lined the wall. Lena saw them, said nothing, walked back out into the street. A man outside the feed store watched her come back out, nudged the man beside him. By the time she reached the corner, 3 women near the dry goods window had already turned to look, not quickly, the way people look at accidents, but slowly, the way they look at something they've already decided about. New woman, alone. No wagon, no husband. 1 bag. She kept walking. An old woman stood over a scattered basket in the mud, jars and parcels spread across the ground, knocked from her hands by a passing cart. People stepped around her like she was something in the way. Lena set her bag down and knelt without being asked, gathering everything piece by piece, pressing the basket back into the woman's hands. The old woman looked at her with sharp eyes. You're new. Yes, ma'am. Where are you staying? The pause answered before Lena did. Her name was Ruth. She had a back room she didn't use, and she asked no questions about why a woman arrived alone with 1 bag and nowhere to go. She just made tea and set a cup in front of Lena without asking how she took it. They sat quiet for a moment. I have a garden out back, Ruth said finally. Roses. Gone completely wild. I can't keep up with them anymore. She wrapped both hands around her cup. People in this town buy flowers for weddings, funerals, Sunday tables. More than you'd think. She looked at Lena over the rim. You could sell them at the morning market. Until you find something steadier. Lena looked at her. Why are you helping me? Ruth set her cup down. Because someone stepped around me once when they shouldn't have. She stood, carried her cup to the basin. Rooms at the end of the hall. There's a bolt on the inside. Lena was in that garden before sunrise the next morning. She cut carefully. Stems long, blooms just open enough, nothing wasted. Set up her borrowed crate at the market, arranged the roses, kept her prices fair and her eyes forward. People slowed, most didn't stop. The whispers moved around her the way weather moves. Heavy woman. Alone. No husband, no explanation, and she let them. She had learned not to answer things that had already made up their minds. She came back the next morning. And the one after that. It was a Tuesday morning before the stalls filled, when 2 small girls in matching dresses came moving through the market with the focused seriousness of people who knew exactly what they needed. The taller one reached her crate first and looked up. "We want the prettiest ones. For Mama's grave." Lena didn't flinch. She asked what their mama's favorite color was and spent 10 full minutes choosing, pulling stems, holding them to the light, discarding, choosing again, building something worthy. She tied it with her last good ribbon and set it in the taller one's arms. The girl looked down at the bundle. "That's too many. We only have 3 pennies." "I know." Lena tucked 2 more stems in white, the kind that lasted. "Those are from me." She folded the girl's fingers around them gently. "Tell your mama a stranger sent them." The smaller one watched all of this without a word. As they turned to leave, she stopped, reached back, pressed her small hand briefly against Lena's, said nothing, then followed her sister into the crowd. Lena stood there after they were gone, the market moving around her like she wasn't there, her hands still warm where the smaller one had touched it. They came back Thursday, then Saturday. Then every morning they could slip away from the ranch. The taller one, Ida, appointed herself helper from the second visit, arranging stems by color while she delivered the important news of the ranch. "Papa burned the eggs again this morning. He said they tasted fine." She handed Lena a stem without being asked. "They did not taste fine." "Does your papa know you come here?" "He knows we go to the market. He doesn't know we stay." "What else does he cook?" "He made soup Tuesday. Put in everything. The dog got the rest." She paused. "The dog left some." Lena laughed before she could stop it. Ada looked satisfied, like she had delivered exactly the news she intended to deliver. Then, without losing a beat, "He braided my hair Sunday. He said it looked beautiful." She touched the side of her head, where whatever braid had been attempted had mostly surrendered to the day. "Did it?" Ada considered this honestly. Nell fixed it after. Nell sat quietly through all of it watching Lena's hands. But it was Nell who said one morning, without looking up, "Papa used to laugh. Before Mama." Ada kept arranging stems. Like she hadn't heard. Like she had heard it too many times. The town noticed. Those girls have no business with a woman like that. Someone should tell their father. The whispers started at the edges, a word here, a look there, and moved inward the way they always do in small towns, until they reached the one person they were meant to reach. The seasonal gathering brought the whole town to the square, loud, festive, everyone watching everyone. Eleanor Voss arrived with Mrs. Henderson and 3 other women who had been engineering this day for months, composed, beautiful, exactly what Ironwood Creek considered correct for a man like Harlan Holt. The cold widower rancher who spoke in 3 words and hadn't looked twice at any woman since his wife died. The women positioned Eleanor carefully and called it coincidence. Lena stayed at her crate. Ada and Nell had found her an hour earlier and stayed, Ada talking, Nell arranging stems she'd already arranged. The shift happened when Mrs. Henderson noticed the girls laughing at Lena's side. It was Ada who noticed first, going still mid-stem, the particular stillness of a child who has heard something she wasn't supposed to. Across the square a woman had stopped and didn't lower her voice. The story traveled in under 2 minutes. Divorced. Alone. Her husband left. Moved the other woman straight in. "Can't blame him," someone said. Laughter rippled outward. Nell stood with a rose forgotten in both hands, watching the crowd, working very hard not to show something. Then, clear, carrying, wanting to be heard, a woman like her was never meant to be loved. Lena's hands went still. She fixed her eyes on the flowers and breathed. She'd learned this. Looking up only gave them what they wanted. That's enough. Not raised. Not performing. The kind of quiet that doesn't need volume because it already has everything else. The laughter stopped like something had been removed from the air. Every person in the square reoriented, not turned, reoriented, toward a man standing completely still at the edge of the crowd. Eleanor, positioned perfectly near the bandstand, stood composed and said nothing. She was very good at that. Ada turned and looked at Lena. Really looked. Something moved through her small face and settled into a decision with the finality of someone twice her age. She took Lena's hand. Nell placed hers inside Lena's from the other side, carefully, the way you set down something you don't want to break. Will you be ours? The square went quiet in a completely different way than before. Lena looked at their two small faces, Ada blazing, Nell still and absolute, and felt something move through her that she had no name for and no defense against. Nell turned and looked across the square. Lena followed. He was already watching. But something had shifted in him, barely visible, the way still water moves when something lands on it. You could see the moment he understood it, and the moment he decided. She had been looked at a great deal in Ironwood Creek. This was different. She couldn't have said how. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. Harlan, those girls have been going to this woman for weeks. She is. He looked at her once, she stopped. He walked forward, picked up her crate. My wagon is on the east side. Harlan, she is a divorced woman. He didn't turn around. I am thinking about my daughters. Lena followed, the town's verdict loud at her back. Two small hands certain in hers. And the man walking ahead, walking away from everything they had built for him today, without explanation, without looking back once. The ranch was larger than she expected and quieter than it should have been. Harlan carried her crate to the porch and showed her a room off the hallway. Small, clean, a window that faced the garden. He said, yours, and walked back out. That was the whole conversation. Lena stood in the middle of that small room for a moment after he left. A bed. A chair. A hook on the wall. The first space that had been entirely hers since everything fell apart. She set her bag down carefully, like she was afraid to disturb something. She was in the kitchen before sunrise. Not because anyone asked. Because the silence of a house that didn't know what to do with her yet felt easier to fill than to sit inside. Safer than wondering what she was doing here, and what would happen when Harlan looked up one morning and wondered the same thing. Harlan himself was polite the way weather is polite. Present, impersonal, asking nothing of you. 3 words at meals. A nod when something was done well. He never stayed in a room longer than necessary and never left anything behind that might start a conversation. But the girls. Ada came alive the way a fire does when someone finally opens a window. She was everywhere. In the kitchen asking questions Lena hadn't finished answering, in the garden pulling things up to see what they were, in the doorway of whatever room Lena happened to be in, arms crossed, looking satisfied with the general state of affairs. Nell's smile came back more slowly, careful, incremental, and then suddenly just there. It took Ada 4 days to begin her campaign. The first scheme involved a jar on the highest shelf that Ada absolutely could not reach, and neither, she insisted, could Nell, and didn't Lena need help, and wasn't Daddy just outside, she'd go get him. Harlan came in, reached the jar in one motion, looked at Ada, looked at the jar, looked at Ada again. Ada looked at the ceiling. Lena looked at the floor. He set the jar on the counter and left. Ada waited until his boots were on the porch steps and turned to Lena with the expression of someone whose plan had worked exactly as intended. Lena, come see. She came out drying her hands to find Ada already halfway up her horse, deeply pleased with herself, and Nell sitting straight in the saddle with the careful posture of someone taking the whole thing seriously. We're learning, Ada announced. Watch. Lena watched from the fence. Harlan worked with them quietly, adjusting, correcting, patient in a way that asked nothing back. Ada pushed faster than she should. Nell listened to every word. After a while, Ada pulled up beside the fence. Do you know how to ride? No, Lena said. Ada turned to her father immediately, the way she turned to her father when she had already decided something and was simply informing him of the logistics. Papa, she doesn't know how to ride. A pause for wait. What if something happens to her? She needs to learn. She gestured broadly at herself and Nell. We'll be right there. She'll feel completely safe. We're very good now. Harlan looked at Ada. Ada looked at her horse's ears. Nell was looking very carefully at something on the horizon. Her mouth was completely straight. Almost. Harlan brought his horse around without a word. She put her foot where he showed her, and then she was up, higher than expected, closer than comfortable. He clicked and the horse moved forward. Ada rode ahead immediately, not looking back once, her satisfaction visible from behind in the set of her small shoulders. Nell rode beside them the whole way, her smile aimed carefully at the horizon where nobody could see it. Nell worked differently. She never announced anything. She simply released information at strategic moments and walked away. Lena said she loves growing roses. Did you know that, Daddy? Harlan looked up from his coffee. Something moved through his face, surprise, and something quieter underneath it. Oh, really? He said, in the tone of a man who found that more interesting than he intended to show. One evening, Nell slid a folded paper across the dinner table to Lena without a word. Lena opened it. For figures drawn in careful pencil, too small, too tall, standing in front of a house with a garden beside it. Lena looked at it for a long time before she trusted herself to look up. After few days, she appeared at her elbow while she was cutting roses. Daddy doesn't play his favorite game anymore, she said quietly. He used to. Then she walked away and left that sitting there in the morning air like something that needed to be held. Harlan appeared at the garden one afternoon with a paper envelope in his hand. Rose seeds. He crouched down without a word, pressed 2 fingers into the soil to show her the depth, moved along the row. She crouched beside him and followed. They worked in silence, shoulder to shoulder, neither of them acknowledging how close that was. When he stood to leave, he set the envelope on the fence post. He didn't say it was hers. He didn't need to. He sat beside her on the porch was the first time he talked about something real. The ranch, the girls. The feeling of carrying something you can't put down even for a moment. He talked slowly, like a man unaccustomed to the sound of his own honesty. Lena listened. Gave nothing back. Keep the wound covered. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Thank you for being here. She looked at him. Don't be kind to me unless you mean it. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he stood and went inside without answering. Behind the window, Ada turned to Nell. I told you, she whispered. Nell just smiled. Mrs. Henderson appeared on a Tuesday with a pie and an apology for not coming sooner. She said the ranch looked well kept. Said the girls looked healthier. Said all the right things while her eyes moved around the kitchen measuring everything. She didn't stay long. She didn't need to. She left Eleanor Voss's name behind her like a calling card on the table. Eleanor herself came the following Saturday. She was exactly what the town had promised. Composed, warm, the kind of beautiful that doesn't announce itself. She brought preserves and asked nothing intrusive and laughed at the right moments and was genuinely, effortlessly kind in a way that made it impossible to find fault with her. Lena watched her from across the kitchen and understood with complete clarity that Eleanor Voss was not the enemy. That was the hardest part. It would have been easier if she were. Harlan was polite. Offered coffee. Didn't encourage the visit and didn't end it. Just sat there in his usual silence while the town's best argument for his future arranged herself at his kitchen table. His silence was the thing. It landed on Lena the same way her husband's silences used to land, heavy, interpretable, telling her everything by saying nothing. She went back to peeling potatoes and kept her face very still. Ada did not keep her face still. She appeared in the kitchen doorway 30 seconds after Eleanor sat down, assessed the situation with the thoroughness of a general surveying a battlefield, and announced that she wasn't hungry. Eleanor offered her a piece of pie. Ada looked at the pie. Looked at Eleanor. No, thank you, she said, in a tone that made thank you sound like something else entirely. Ada, Harlan said. Ada looked at Eleanor with genuine curiosity. Why do you keep coming over? Nobody invited you. Ada. Harlan's voice dropped. I'm just asking. She was sent to her room. She went, loudly, her opinion announced clearly on every single step up the staircase, the bedroom door closing behind her with precisely enough force to make its feelings known without crossing into punishment. Nell said nothing. That was worse. She sat at the table through Eleanor's visit with her hands folded and her back straight and answered every question put to her in full, polite sentences. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. The voice of a child performing the role of a child, mechanical and empty, like she had stepped back from the surface of herself and left something hollow in her place. She didn't draw that evening. Didn't whisper anything to Ada before bed. Didn't leave any folded papers on anyone's pillow. Lena noticed. She noticed the way you notice when a sound you've gotten used to suddenly stops. That night she waited until the house was quiet, then carried her lamp to Nell's door and didn't light it. Just sat down in the dark beside the small bed. Nell was awake. She didn't pretend otherwise. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Nell reached out and found Lena's hand in the dark and held on. Lena felt it before she heard it, the small shuddering breath of a child who has been holding something in for a very long time. I don't remember her face anymore. Nell's voice was barely there. I try and I can't. Ada can't either, but she doesn't say it. Papa has a photograph. In his drawer. We don't ask to see it because it makes him go somewhere far away. Lena didn't speak, just held on. You sent her flowers. Nell's grip tightened slightly. You didn't know her and you sent her flowers and said to tell her a stranger sent them. She was quiet for a moment. Ada cried after. She didn't want me to tell you that. The dark held them both. We don't want you to go. Nell said it the way she said everything that mattered. Quietly, like a fact she had simply decided to stop carrying alone. I know that's not fair to say, but we don't. Lena looked at the small shape beside her in the dark, at the hand holding hers like something that didn't want to be let go of. She could have said, I'm not going anywhere. It would have been the kind thing. It would have been easy. I know, she said instead. I'm here right now. Nell was quiet for a moment. Then she moved closer, just slightly, and closed her eyes. They sat like that until Nell's breathing evened out and her grip finally loosened into sleep. Lena stayed longer than she needed to. On the walk back to her room she passed her own doorway and kept walking down to the kitchen, and stood at the window for a long time looking out at the dark garden where the rose seeds were just beginning to do something under the soil. She knew this feeling. The careful arithmetic of it. Tallying what you have against what you're about to lose, calculating how much it will hurt depending on how long you wait. She had learned, after everything with her husband, that the only way to survive losing something was to begin leaving before you were pushed. Build the door yourself. Walk through it on your own terms. She hadn't built the door yet, but she could feel herself reaching for the tools. She was in the garden when he found her. Not looking for her. She could tell by the way he stopped when he saw her, like he'd intended to go somewhere else and arrived here instead. He had a tool in his hand. Something to do with the fence post at the far end. He didn't explain and she didn't ask. She kept working. He worked on the fence. The morning was quiet the way the ranch was quiet, not empty, just unhurried, full of small sounds that had started to feel familiar. At some point the stem she was working with snapped wrong. She made a small sound without meaning to, frustration, nothing more, and before she'd finished making it he was beside her, his hand over hers, adjusting the angle without a word. Showing her the way he'd shown her the seeds, patient, impersonal. Except it wasn't impersonal. Not entirely. Not anymore. His hand stayed a half-second longer than it needed to. She felt him notice that it had. Neither of them moved. The garden held its breath. Then he stepped back, picked up his tool, walked toward the house without looking back. She stood there for a moment with the stem in her hands and let herself feel it, just for that moment, just while no one was watching, what it would mean if she was wrong about how this ended. Then she followed him inside. Harlan's sister Margaret was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded and the air of someone who had been waiting long enough. Margaret looked at her for a moment. Then she set her cup down. I think it's time we spoke honestly. Lena sat down, kept her hands steady. 6 months ago Harlan made me a promise. Margaret's voice was measured, not unkind. After Catherine died, he closed every door in himself. Wouldn't look at anyone, wouldn't consider anything. The girls were growing up without. She stopped. Started again. I asked him to try. He said give me 6 months. To grieve properly. To think. The pause. Eleanor Voss is a good woman. The town agreed. I arranged it because he asked me to handle it, and I did. Lena said nothing. He was ready, Margaret said. He was almost ready. And then you came. Not accusing. Just factual. And my nieces chose you in the middle of the town square, and now she stopped again. Looked at her hands. He doesn't know what he wants anymore. And Eleanor has been patient long enough. The kitchen was very quiet. I'm not asking you to disappear, Margaret said. I'm asking you to understand what you're standing in the middle of. He made a promise. He is not a man who breaks promises lightly. She stood, smoothed her skirt. I think you already know what the right thing is. I think that's the kind of woman you are. She left without waiting for an answer. Lena sat at the table for a long time after the door closed. The garden was visible through the window, the roses coming in, the soil she and Harlan had worked together, the fence post he'd fixed this morning with his hand over hers half a second longer than it needed to be. She knew what the right thing was. She had always known. That night she took her bag from the bottom of the wardrobe and just started folding. The next morning Lena waited until Harlan had gone out to the yard. Then she called the girls to the kitchen. Ada knew before she sat down. She could always tell. She sat with her hands flat on the table and her chin up and her eyes already bright and dangerous. Nell sat beside her and said nothing. I have to go, Lena said. Simply. No gentle framing. They were too smart for gentle framing and she respected them too much. Ada's chair scraped back. No. Ada. No. She stood up. You can't. You live here. You're ours. Her voice was climbing, cracking at the edges. We chose you. In front of everyone. We chose you and you said. She stopped. Because Lena hadn't said anything. That was the truth of it and Ada was smart enough to know it. Her face crumpled for just a moment, one unguarded second, before she pulled it back together with both hands. Then I'll tell Papa. He'll fix it. He fixes everything. Lena looked at her. Didn't answer. Ada's certainty flickered. Just slightly. He will, she said. But quieter. Nell hadn't moved. She sat with her hands folded in her lap looking at the table. Then she stood up, very straight, and walked to her room. The door closed behind her. Not a slam. Just a click. Lena stood in the hallway outside that closed door for a long time. Her hand came up once toward the handle. Then dropped. She went to pack the rest of her bag. Harlan found out the way he found out most things on this ranch, through Ada, who appeared in the barn doorway with red eyes and her arms crossed and informed him in a voice stripped of all its usual performance that Lena was leaving and he needed to go inside right now and fix it. He set down what he was holding. He found Lena in her room. Bag on the bed. Nearly full. She didn't startle when he appeared in the doorway. Like she had been expecting him. Like she had been waiting to see what he would do. Why are you leaving? She folded something. Set it in the bag. Because I know how this ends. You don't know how this ends. She looked at him then. Really looked. The way she had learned not to look at people because it showed too much. Margaret told me about the promise. About Eleanor. About 6 months. The pause. I know what I am here, Harlan. I know what I was supposed to be, someone to mind the girls until the real thing arrived. I'm not angry about that. I just can't. She stopped. Started again. I cannot stay in a house waiting to be replaced. I have done that. I know exactly how it feels and I cannot do it again. He said nothing. She waited. The whole room waited. He stood in that doorway with everything she had just said filling the space between them and she watched him, This man who had defended her in a crowded square with 2 words, who had crouched beside her in the garden and shown her how deep to press her fingers into the soil, who had sat on the porch and told her things he didn't know how to say out loud, she watched him stand there and not say the thing that needed to be said. His jaw tightened. Something moved through his face. But the words didn't come. She picked up her bag. He stepped aside. Ada didn't come out of her room to say goodbye. Lena stood at the front door for a moment, just a moment, then walked out into the cold morning air. The ranch was quiet behind her. No door opened. No voice called out. Just silence. The particular silence of something that had almost been something. She had built the door herself. She was walking through it on her own terms. It didn't feel the way she thought it would. She went back to Ruth. Ruth opened the door, looked at her face, and didn't ask a single question. Just put the kettle on and set a cup down without asking how she took it. Same as the first time. Lena sat at that table and felt the full weight of everything she was carrying and kept her face very still. The roses came in, Ruth said finally, while you were gone. All of them. Lena looked out the window at the wild garden. Every stem blooming without permission, without tending, stubborn and indifferent to everything that had happened. She went back to her stall the next morning, set up the crate, arranged the flowers, kept her prices fair and her eyes forward. The town watched her return the way it watched everything, with stillness and sideways looks and the quiet satisfaction of people whose predictions had come true. She let them look. For mornings passed. On the 5th she was alone in the square before sunrise, cutting stems in the gray early light the way she always was before the town woke up. Before anyone could look at her. The kind of quiet that belonged only to people who had nowhere else to be and had made a kind of peace with that. She felt him before she saw him. She looked up. He was standing at the edge of the empty square. Still as something that had been there a long time. Hat in his hands this time, not pulled low, not hiding anything. Just standing there in the early gray light looking at her the way she had never let herself be looked at. He crossed the square. Stopped at her stall. He picked up a single stem, a rose, one of Ruth's, deep red, just open enough, and turned it in his hands without looking at it. Nell spoke last night. His voice was rough at the edges. First time in 4 days. Lena went very still. You know what she said? She shook her head. She said, he stopped. Cleared his throat. Started again. Daddy, go get her. She belongs here. The last 2 words came out rougher than the rest. 6 years old. Knows exactly what she wants. Lena's throat tightened until she couldn't answer. My daughters have never been wrong about a person, Harlan said. Not once. Not ever. He set the stem down on the crate. Looked at her directly, fully, without the usual careful distance. I've been wrong about a great many things. Wrong to stay quiet. Wrong to let you walk out. Wrong to let you stand in that square and hear what they said about you and not tell you, right then, in front of all of them, what I actually thought. She started to speak. I know about your husband, he said. Not the town's version. Margaret found out the real version. What he did to you was not your fault. None of it. Not one single part of it was your fault. That was the thing. Not the tenderness. Not what was coming. Just that, someone saying plainly, without softening it, without making her carry it differently, it was not your fault. She didn't collapse. She wasn't a woman who collapsed. She just stood there while her eyes filled and her hands found the edge of the stall and held on, and she breathed through it the way she had breathed through everything, carefully, quietly, alone. Except she wasn't alone. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, Harlan said. I'm not asking you to trust me before I've earned it. I'm asking you to let me try. That's all. He picked up the rose again. Turned it once more in his hands. Just let me try to be different than he was. She looked at him for a long time. He looked at the rose in his hand for a moment. Then he reached across and tucked it carefully into her hair, just above her ear, gentle, certain, the way you do something you have been thinking about for a long time. She went very still. He looked at her. Not the way the town looked. Not measuring or calculating or finding fault. Just looking. Like she was exactly what she was, and that was more than enough. "Your girls," she said finally. "They are going to be completely insufferable about this." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but closer than she had ever seen. Closer than she thought he knew how to get. "They already are," he said. She laughed. Real and sudden and helpless. The first real laugh in longer than she could remember, and it surprised her so completely that she had to press her hand to her mouth, and that made her laugh harder, and he watched her laugh with that almost smile, and something in his expression went quiet and certain and decided. He reached across the stall and took her hand. Not tentative. Not careful. Just certain, the way he did everything that mattered. Then from the far edge of the square, small, carrying, absolutely unable to contain itself. Nell. It worked. It worked. Ada. Of course Ada. They had followed him. Of course they had. Nell stood beside her sister with both fists pressed against her mouth, eyes full and bright, trying with everything she had not to make a sound and failing completely. Lena looked at those two small faces across the empty morning square, Ada vibrating with the triumph of someone whose plan had worked on every level she designed it to work on, Nell's quiet joy spilling over the edges of her careful containment, and felt something she had stopped believing in begin, very quietly, to feel possible again. Not certain. Not yet. Just possible. That was enough. That was more than enough. The sign above her flower stall had always been plain wood. Nothing written on it, nothing marked, just a woman selling roses in a borrowed space, trying to be small enough not to disturb anything. The morning everything changed, Ada and Nell arrived before sunrise with a pot of paint and a plan that had clearly been discussed at length between them, details worked out, responsibilities assigned. Ada painted the ranch brand in the top corner. Harlan's mark, slightly uneven, deeply serious. Nell pressed both palms flat into the paint and placed them carefully on either side. Two small handprints. Perfectly deliberate. They stepped back and looked at it with the satisfaction of people who had built something that was going to last. Lena stood behind them looking at that sign. The ranch brand, the two small hands, the roses coming in all around it, and understood that this was what home looked like when you hadn't been born into it but had been chosen into it instead. Chosen by two small girls who had known before anyone else did. She put her arms around both of them and held on. Ada allowed this for approximately 4 seconds before announcing that the paint wasn't dry yet and someone needed to be responsible around here. Nell leaned in closer and said nothing and smiled at something only she could see. They married in the garden in October, when every rose she had ever planted was open at once, as if the garden had been waiting too, and had decided this was the moment. She had worn deep rose pink her whole life without knowing it was the color of something coming. Ruth sat in the front row in her best dark dress with her hands folded in her lap and her sharp intelligent eyes very bright, the way they got when she was feeling something she had decided not to name out loud. She had known. Of course she had known. She had put the kettle on twice without asking, and that had been enough. Harlan said his vows the way he did everything that mattered. Quietly, certain, without looking away once. Ada stood at the front with both hands on her hips and her chin lifted so everyone could see that this had gone exactly according to plan. Nell stood beside her sister with both fists pressed to her mouth and her eyes full and bright. The same way she had stood in the empty square that cold gray morning when everything began. The same joy. Just finally allowed to spill over. Lena looked at Ruth's bright eyes, at the two small faces, at the man beside her, at the roses open all around them, and felt something she had stopped believing in settle into her chest like it had always lived there and had simply been waiting for her to come home. She had built the door herself. She had walked through it on her own terms. And on the other side, all of this. Ada announced afterward that the whole thing had gone exactly according to plan. Nell smiled at something only she could see. Some things never change. The best things never do.